Okay, hopefully we have just gone live on the webcast. I'm Josh Williams, new Chair of Audit and Governance. I'm just going to read out the webcasting notice. Please note, this meeting is being filmed for live and subsequent broadcast via the Council's website. You should be aware the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during a webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. Members of the public seated in the public gallery will not ordinarily be filmed by the automated system. However, please be aware that by moving forward of the pillar, or in the unlikely event of a technical malfunction, your image may be captured. Therefore, by entering the meeting room, you consent to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. We do have one member of the public. Good evening. So when it's your turn for a question, please remain where you are in the public speaker section, or please join us at the table. So we are quite close together at the table this evening, so that all elected members are on the are captured on the screen, I think, although when I look at it, it is rather small, but I believe we're all captured on that screen. Now, if anyone is not happy sitting so close, the idea was that this would be a business meeting rather than a political meeting, so we're here to scrutinise these reports rather than argue politically over political matters. But if you would like to spread out, if you have any concerns over COVID, please do. Please take another chair at the table and give yourself 2 meters. And obviously, if COVID numbers rise, we will spread out for future meetings. Okay. No one is moving, thank you very much. I'm going to start with a chair's announcement before we move on to the agenda items. I'd like to propose a vote of thanks to the previous chair of Audit and Governance, David Stevens, who was the first ever chair of Reading's Audit and Governance Committee, starting back in 2011, and who chaired with remarkable dedication to the people of Reading for over a decade. He may well stand for election again one day, I don't know, he may be back, but for the time being, I'd very much like to minute our gratitude to him for his service. I'm very happy if any councillors want to speak on this. I've already had indications from Councillor Dennis and Councillor Mitchell. So I'll start with Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just have a brief statement for Mr. David Stevens. It is with much respect that I make this vote of thanks at my first ever Audit and Governance meeting to David Stevens for his commitment to Reading as Audit and Governance Chair since its creation in 2011. During his tenure as Chair, he has had to deal with some very difficult situations for the finances of the Council and has done so with integrity and impartiality, putting the town first at all times. Having spent time with David, I can definitely vouch for David's commitment to the town and wanting the best for it. Just to mention, we hope to get him back here on the Audit and Governance Committee in the future.
I'm sure he'd be very welcome. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to yourself, Councillor Williams, and to Councillor Dennis for your very kind words about David. I just absolutely endorse everything you've said. David was a class act as chairman of the committee and as a fellow councillor, regardless of his political colour at the time. We relied on him greatly, without making it political, as our association treasurer as well in Reading East. And his professional background, his ability and his decency and his desire always to work collaboratively wherever possible was a shining example, I would say, to all of us. Clearly, as you've said, Chair, this is a business committee, and I won't make it political, but his loss to us recently was the Labour Party's gain. We were very sorry to see him go, but I'm proud to follow in his footsteps as a mere member of the committee for now. And should he choose to stand again for electoral success, we wish him all the well, regardless of any past history. So a thank you vote is entirely appropriate, and I'm very grateful to you, Chair, for moving it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you both for your words. No other indications. So maybe we can have a show of hands to minute a vote of thanks for David Stevens. Thank you very much all. We move on to the first agenda item, which is declarations of interest. Do we have any this evening? Looking round, shaking heads. No from all. Thank you. We move on to the minutes of the last meeting, which I will be asked to sign, but I was not in attendance. We do have Councillors Gittings, Edwards and Emberson who were here, and so they may have read through and can note the correctness. But for the rest of us, does anyone have any concerns, or are we happy to agree those minutes? Everyone's happy. I'll sign those for Mr. Popham shortly. Thank you very much. We now move to questions, and we have, I'm very grateful to Mr. Wellham for submitting a question in my first meeting as chair. It's an interesting question for this committee. So would you like to remain seated, or would you like to come forward and join us?
I'll stay here, thank you.
You're happy to remain. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I'm going to ask Mr. Wellham to read his question, and then I'm going to invite the lead member responsible, Councillor Liz Terry, to answer.
I'm going to skip the preamble because you can all read that yourself. And what I hate in presentations is when the person reads the slides. It's unprofessional. So the actual question is, as of the 19th of July 2022, does the authority comply with all provisions of the Local Authority Transparency Code 2015?
Thank you very much. I invite Councillor Terry to speak.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Wellham, for your question. Officers responded to the internal audit report by reviewing all sections of the transparency pages on the Council's website and the underlying procedures. Officers also engaged with data owners across multiple council departments to ensure that data was brought up to date and would be regularly refreshed. In addition, a policy and procedure was implemented after review by the Information Governance Board. Some of the information which was updated over the last year has fallen out of currency, which indicates that further work is necessary to strengthen the procedures and monitor them more closely. There is a gap in the current data, which has been acknowledged with you, following your communication with council officers who have written to you with regards to paragraphs 48 and 49 of the code, and the requirement to list numerous items of data for all staff earning over £50,000. As you will know, we have published senior staff salaries and benefits on the website. However, we acknowledge that further information could be provided surrounding responsibilities. For example, the services and functions they are responsible for, budget held and number of staff. The number of staff involved in this over £50,000 cohort is considerable, and there is no current data set which provides the totality of the Section 49 recommended information. This requirement affects council staff and school staff in RG9 and above, so we are not talking about senior managers as we might understand them. We are talking about a large group of professional technical specialists and middle managers. So the requirement of the Transparency Code calls for data which does not exist in any single data set, and so we will have to review how this might be brought together. We have commissioned our HR section to review this requirement and establish if and how this information can be collated and published in a proportionate and cost-effective way. I don't have an update at this time for the timescales for that to be completed.
Thank you very much, Councillor Terry. I would also note that we receive a report on information governance, agenda item 8 this evening. Mr. Wellham, do you wish a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you. In fact, I've got lots of questions, so really I've got to try and condense it to one single question. But I will, in this case, give a preamble first. The 2015 code was preceded by the 2014, and before that there was code at 2011, because the government at the time, I believe it might have been a Tory government, but that doesn't matter, said we recognise the value to the nation for councils providing this information to the public so that they can hold the local authorities accountable. So the bottom line is Reading Borough Council have failed since at least 2015. They have failed to provide this information. It's actually worse than that. They did start to provide some section 28, that's the greater than.
Thank you for your preamble. Can you move to a question so that Councillor Terry can respond?
Yeah, fine. Right. The question is, why does the greater than 500 and the contracts not provide clear data relating to the purpose of the expenditure? In some cases, there's actually no entry for the expenditure at all. In other cases, it is so bland as to be absolutely meaningless. And without the purpose, I, as a member of the public, cannot understand why the expenditure has been made.
Okay, yes, I'll pass to Councillor Terry.
So thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wellham. I'm afraid it's a question I can't answer in the technical detail. I mean, clearly, if the code requires us to publish data, we should be doing everything we can to ensure that we get to the point where we're publishing all the data that we're required to publish as soon as possible. I don't know if Mr. Graham has anything to add to that in terms of the detail of your question, which I can't say I entirely understood, not because it's not a good question, it's because I didn't entirely understand it.
Thank you. I'll be happy to pass over.
Yes, I mean, I think this might be sort of going into something which we might have a different sort of opinion on, because the information which is required for contract spend over £500,
5,000
and sorry, 5,000, yeah, and the tenders as well, they do have information about purpose, which you may feel is somewhat superficial, but that will be information which is coming forward from information systems to be reported there. I'm certainly happy to give a written response on your behalf, Councillor Terry, to Mr. Wellham, and we'll perhaps go into some further detail if that's helpful.
The 5,000 contract is reasonably good.
Thank you. We're not able to continue to take questions, unfortunately, but I would like to request that further written response is provided to you on that. So if you have any specific details that you would like answered, please do send them to me. Whatever email address you'd like.
You want them sending to you?
I'm happy to share with Councillor Terry and with Mr. Graham, and we'd be happy to provide a written response. If you would like to submit any future questions, of course, it is only one supplementary per answer, though. Thank you very much for coming in. Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to agenda item 4, the Internal Audit Annual Assurance Report, or as my iPad slows right down, which I think will be introduced by the Chief Auditor, Paul Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. So this is my annual report along with my annual assurance opinion. So for those members who are new to this committee, each year from the 1st of April, I implement an audit plan for the year, which covers the key risks that I consider and the Council's Section 151 officer considers, who's the statutory officer, are the areas that we should be auditing over the forthcoming 12 months. So that plan is a programme of work, and at the end of the year, I then report on what we've achieved and give an annual assurance opinion, which is informed by that planned activity. So this report gives my opinion. It also documents the key themes arising from the audit work during the 2021-22 financial year. And then it compares what we plan to do, and it summarises the performance of the audit function and the Council's corporate investigations team. So as with all my reports, the detail is in the appendix, and if I ask you to skip to the appendix, which I can find it myself, on page 17 of your report pack. So I'm going to shoot straight to page 19, internal audit effectiveness. So as a prerequisite of giving an assurance opinion, you need assurance that the internal audit service is fit for purpose to carry out the work which informs the annual assurance opinion. So we benchmark the way we do things against the public sector internal audit standards. That's a continuous process each year. And once every 5 years, we have an external review by CIPFA, which is the Chartered Institute of Public finance and accountancy. So they've completed their review, and their review confirmed that we are fully compliant with the public sector internal audit standards, and that report will be presented to this committee in September. So moving on to my assurance opinion on page 20. So this opinion is based on an assessment of the design and operation of the governance and internal control framework at the council, and it's informed by a range of opinions arising from the work, the audit assignments we've done over the past 12 months. So I have given reasonable assurance opinion, and whilst no assurance can ever be absolute, on the basis of the work completed during the course of the year, I've concluded that reasonable assurance can now be placed on the adequacy and effectiveness of the council's internal control framework. Just to put this into some context, since the 2016-17 financial year, so the past 4 out of 5 years, I've given limited assurance. So this is an improvement in the control environment. So historically, the reason for the limited assurance opinion have been predominantly, but not totally, due to the poor controls within the council's financial framework and some of the key financial systems and key financial processes. And I'm pleased to say there has been substantial improvement over the past 12 months. So carrying on under section 2.2, I just lay out the reasons for the improved assurance opinion and some of the reviews which have informed that. So for example, accounts payable. So this is where we pay our suppliers. That work stream is essentially concluded, and that's addressed a number of key audit concerns. Accounts receivable, that's an area. So this is debtors. This is sundry debt. So again, there's been a lot of work done in that area. So over the past 4-5 years, we've been given either limited or no assurance. That's now reasonable. So that's positive. After considerable effort going back a number of years, the main bank account and reconciliation process has been reviewed, improved and brought up to date. So it then goes on to give further detail as to why I've given a reasonable assurance opinion. But one of the key areas is last year, I said that staff resources continue to be an issue with a very high turnover of staff and reliance on interim staff in a number of key positions within finance. We now have a very stable and permanent senior structure within the finance team, which I think is really, really important. And that is now providing sort of stability and the continuity that the service needs going forward. Critical project activity over this forthcoming financial year will be the implementation of the new finance system and the successful and timely migration of all the financial data from our existing finance system to the new one. So section 3 of the reports on page 23 just gives you a summary of the audit work, so you can see where we've given substantial, reasonable and limited assurance opinions. There's a graph on page 24 which just shows you the direction, so it does show some improvement. Where the limited assurance reviews or no assurance reviews haven't dropped considerably, they're not in the areas of the key financial system, so that's why I'm able to give a more positive assurance opinion this year. Section 4 highlights those areas where we still need further improvement, so they will be subject to a follow-up review sometime in the next 12 months. Section 5 on page 27 talks about the corporate governance framework and the risk management framework of the council. Section 6 on page 29 just gives you an idea of performance. So this is what we plan to do against what we actually did. And then key performance indicators for the team, which I won't go into it in detail. And then in section 7, which falls on the page 32, is the work of the corporate investigations team. And it's just gives you a brief sort of high-level view of the types of investigations the team have undertaken in the past 12 months compared to the previous 2 financial years. Thank you, Chair. Any questions?
Thank you very much. We as members are asked to note the assurance opinion given by the Chief Auditor and consider the issues raised in the annual report. Does anyone have any comments, thoughts or questions on that? Please, yeah, Councillor Terry.
Thank you. I just simply want to make a comment that the colleagues will know that I have been on audit and governance in the past and I've been away for a while. So this is my first meeting for a while and I'm very pleased to see the progress that's been made. It's great to see that we've got the reasonable assurance. We know that there are still things to, and there always will be. We are a large bureaucratic organisation and there's always going to be issues about checking that we're as good as we should be. But both in terms of the work of the team and in terms of the progress the council's made, it's reassuring. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is anyone else indicating on this one? Yes, Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. And I reflect Councillor Terry's pleasure that improvements are clearly underway. And it is very good that we have a better assurance rating. But the areas for improvement are clearly identified. They do raise some alarm bells. Obviously, we had a well-publicised £1 million overpayment during the last year. And this makes quite stark reading as to why that happened. Incorrect application of inflationary increases, lack of common understanding of roles and responsibilities. There was no adequate control over workflow process around the treatment of such uplifts, etc. I'm pleased that's been identified, but what assurances or how confident are you that we will get on top of this within the next year? You say it's subject to review within the year. Clearly, something like that feels more of a priority for relatively urgent action, in my view. So I'd be interested in on the level of work that's necessary to address these identified failings.
Should we come to Councillor Dennis, and then if there's any questions, we can take them at the same time.
Yeah, my question is based around the Mosaic platform. There seems to be some shortcomings there, and I'm wondering whether or not what's being done to really sort that out.
If we can pass back to Mr. Harrington, then yes, we've got questions on what's being done to address the failings urgently that are identified, and specifically the Mosaic system.
Unfortunately, they all revolve around the Mosaic system and the processes that support the transactions in that system. So at the time of the audit, the Executive Director and Deputy Director for that service attended the Audit Committee to present a programme of work that they will be doing from the date of the audit over the next 6 months to rectify the control weaknesses. So there is a plan in process. Now, I can't sit here and tell you what they've done because I'll become judge and jury if that makes sense. So as an auditor, we have flagged this as a serious risk, and that was given, I think at the time, no assurance. So that's on my radar, and we need to go back at some point to ensure that they have implemented that improvement plan. But what we have done in the meantime is we've worked with the service where they've drafted new processes, they've mapped new processes, they've designed new processes, and we're working with them to ensure that the appropriate checks and balances and controls are in place. So we have done, I've done that personally, and so has the auditor who performed this audit. But to give you that assurance that everything's been done, we need to go back and test it and then bring the report back to this committee, which we will do.
Thank you very much. I might note that we're going to get later on in the agenda the Audit Recommendations Tracker. One of the powers of this committee is that if we see audit recommendations drifting in a way that we're not happy with, we can ask in an officer to talk to us about that specific area. So if you see on that recommendations tracker a whole bunch of recommendations not moving fast enough, and then we can request an officer to come in at the next meeting and talk us through those. So we'll get to that further down the line. Is anyone else indicating on this item? No, I might say a couple of words. Yes, I will. I, like Councillor Terry, was really glad to see the reasonable assurance assessment. For a while, I thought it would be better to see substantial, but the reasonable represents progress, but with more to do, which is, I think, exactly where we are. And I think that's excellent. That means we're seeing improvements, and at the same time, we're not getting ahead of ourselves and getting complacent. So I think that's perfect. There are some areas I was going to highlight, which was Mosaic, but also the financial sort of systems relationship between Brighter Futures and RBC looks like an area that this committee is going to look for visibility on going through the year as well. There's also lots to be happy about, especially the permanent roles rather than temporary staff. So when the basics had gone wrong and drifted and are now being righted, we really need that permanence in Reading, I think, to make sure that things don't go wrong again. So that's really good news. I think we'd all like to thank Internal Audit for their work. So if there's nothing else, are we all happy with the recommended actions?
Yes, Chair.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Everyone nodded. We're happy with those. Okay, number 5 is back to Mr. Harrington, I think, because it is the Internal Audit Quarterly Progress Report, and we are asked to consider the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Okay, so page 37 of your pack, this is my internal audit quarterly update report. So at the end of each quarter, I provide a report just highlighting those audits we've finalised in the previous quarter. So we're now between April and June, and these are the reviews we've completed in that period. So again, the details in the appendix, which I'm going to go straight to on page 41, but if we can skip down to page 43. So we've undertaken a review of Treasury management in the last quarter, and just to keep it in very simple, plain English, Treasury management is the council's investments, borrowing, cash flows, banking, money market, capital market transactions, etc. And it's so important that that area is well controlled, because you're dealing with not pounds and pence, but millions and millions of pounds. So it is a very, very well controlled, documented process, which is looked after by chief accountants, and it comprises of properly trained and qualified staffs. And we believe that there's effective arrangements in place to manage the risks associated with Treasury management, and that's been given substantial assurance. So I think that's really, really positive. So accounts receivable is the next one. So that's debtors, which I referred to because that informed my annual assurance opinion. This is an area that we've had lots of issues in the past, but there are certainly have been improvements, although we're not quite there yet. We highlighted that there's been less satisfactory progress with historical debt, mainly because it is historical and it's difficult to tackle. We recommended that a decision needs to be taken on the likelihood of recovery of the oldest historical debt, and write-offs that should be used where there is considered to be negligible chance of recovery. We also had concerns with it's been moved from one system, from our revenue system, into our current sort of general ledger system, which is Oracle Fusion, and we still got concerns over the reporting capabilities of the debtors module on Oracle Fusion. But again, this will be moving to the new financial system in due course. The third area is client contributions, and the audit of this particular area focused on the assessment process. The checks are being undertaken to establish capital, savings and income to determine the ability to contribute to care costs, and then how quickly clients were being invoiced in the relation to commencement of care provided. So again, this is, we talked about Mosaic is the Mosaic system, and we've still got some concerns. We flagged concerns over the manual processes which are involved in this, which could lead to which are time intensive, and obviously increases the likelihood of error. So that was given reasonable assurance, but it was on the cusp of limited. But the action plan and the management response was very, very thorough, and to be fair to the service, they were aware of the risks and they were putting in actions to address those risks at the time of the audit. So page 47 just gives you a high-level overview of the audits we plan to do in this financial year and what we've done to date. And then Section 4, page 50, just gives you an overview of the corporate investigations we've undertaken in the last quarter, covering council tax support, housing tenancy investigations, social care, and blue badge misuse and fraud. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. As a slight aside, before I open it up, we've already received a briefing session on Treasury management, and a general finance training session is in the diary for the 26th of July from Darren Carter, if anyone can make that. I've also asked for a training session from the internal audit team, which Paul has hopefully agreed to set one up for us after the summer, possibly alongside a similar session from external audit at the same time. We do them both at once. I'm aware that might be quite a long meeting for us, but I don't necessarily want to bring members in twice, so hopefully that will work. One of the things I've asked for a bit more understanding from internal audit is how their recommendations drop into these three buckets, red, amber and green, and that will be covered in the training session. So the report has 3 reviews, all 3 positive, 1 substantial, 2 reasonable. They led to a total of 16 audit recommendations. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this one? No, nothing. Well, I think then we thank, well, no, actually a brief note from me then, because section 4.1 of the report, rather than the appendix, notes that there's a resource issue within internal audit which could impact on the ability of the team to complete the audit plan in its entirety. So I think, as with the previous item, internal audit have our full support, and if there isn't the resource to complete the plan as it was originally described, that's just something that we would like to keep our eyes on throughout the year. But again, our thanks to internal audit. Are we happy with the recommended actions? Yes, Chair. Yeah. Yes, Chair. Thank you very much all, and thank you very much to Mr. Harrington. Right, brief pause while I shuffle bits of paper, and we move on to item 6, the risk management policy and procedure. So I think is an introduction from Mr. Pringle, or am I going back to Mr. Harrington?
Don't think Mr. Pringle's here this evening, so I'll present the report.
Back to you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So this is our new risk management policy and procedure, and the report presented just gives an update and asks the committee for consideration before onward submission to policy committee in September. So the updated policy and procedure set out in Appendix 1 incorporates a 1-page policy statement. It gives the key definitions to improve the understanding of terms and processes with respect to risk management. It highlights the council's risk management process, including factors to consider. It details the reporting framework and the need to identify the risk appetite per risk and to plan in risk management proactively rather than reactively. It expands the details of the monitoring process, and it provides updated roles and responsibilities for elected members, staff, and those with specific duties. And it's an enhanced commitment to the policy and procedure review. So risk management is, in its simple terms, split into 2 components. One is the governance and the transparency. So the risk register, the council's strategic risk register, is presented to this committee currently every 6 months, so it's due to come in September. So you can highlight or track the key strategic risks as identified by the council's corporate management team. And secondly, it's about the delivery, the doing. So risk management is the responsibility of every manager in the council, and each manager should be responsible for managing their risks and flagging and reporting their risks before they become an issue. And this process and procedure supported by the support departments such as health and safety, internal audit, insurance, business continuity and emergency planning. They work together to help facilitate risk management in the council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, rather than noting a report, we've got a positive action for us to consider. We as members are asked to review and agree the updated risk management policy and procedure, which is then going to be sent on to policy committee, which a few members are also on, I think. I'm going to say a couple of words from the chair because I'd really like to hear members' opinions. This is an update from the 2020 document, and I think it's an excellent one. My questions from the chair about how we know that the excellent stuff in this document is actually carried out and not simply a well-drafted document that then we just save onto a server somewhere. So I'd be really interested to hear members' opinions and thoughts on that before we send it on to policy committee. So, for example, what are the review mechanisms? How is its implementation going to be scrutinised? How will its effectiveness be measured? And I'll draw members' attention because a lot of this is referenced on pages 13 and 14 of the document, but I think it's a key element that we don't produce something very good and then save it somewhere. As Mr. Harrington said, we see an updated risk register coming to us at the next meeting, and that'll be every 6 months. We could request that comes to us every meeting if we wish, if we think it's significant enough. We will also see something that I think will be a big improvement, which is a risk assessment appearing as standard on committee reports requiring a decision, provided policy committee agree to this, of course. So that's my view. Open up to everybody. What do we think? What are your thoughts on the document itself and how we might ensure it's carried out? Has anyone got any thoughts? Oh. No. Yes, Councillor Dennis.
Well, it would have to be, I would suppose, in the form of some sort of tracker. For example, in the report here, I've got directors, deputy assistant directors receive risk management training. For example, you know, we need to be able to verify that that has been done. There needs to be some sort of certificate, or I don't know, you know, something that proves that training was done, not just a tick in a box, but an actual show that training was done. And there's a number of other points on here which are similar, and I suppose they could follow the same kind of process, so that it can come before this committee and we can scrutinise it in the way that we should be. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Gittings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, obviously, risk management. I'm thinking of sort of current events at the moment with, you know, catastrophic heat conditions, you know, obviously, and, you know, the effects of climate change. And so would this be an example of something where the risk profile would have considerably increased? Because they, you know, I mean, I think Havering Council at the moment, I've just listened on the radio, the leader was having to deal with, they've got forest fires and within their borough, and also, you know, residents are being affected quite seriously. Council Emergency Services team are there. You know, so I'm just wondering if that's an example of the sort of thing that this is about, but also are we judging that the risk is increased because of, you know, so not just recent events, but things that have happened over the, you know, over the last several years, but also always come to a head when you're at 40-degree temperature.
Councillor Terry, do you want to say a few words, and then we'll pass over to internal audit for any comment?
Well, first of all, obviously I welcome that there's been a review and update of the policy and procedure. I think in terms of tracking, you know, we will get regular reports. I think there's a certain amount of diminishing returns on having things tracked to a certain degree. But as long as we're getting the regular reports that advise us, you know, and that report could include confirmation of who's had the training and whether there's any concerns that staff haven't taken it up. So it's like the cybersecurity stuff, you know, we do want to know that. So I think it's a good point, but whether it needs to be a tracker, I think it could be part of the updating. To my colleague, Councillor Gittings, there's a thing called emergency planning, which is different to the risk register. I would say that I would expect that council staff would consider whether something occurs a bit more often and therefore might need to come into the risk register. So insurance policy, for example, you know, you might say there's a risk around do we self-insurance versus other things. I mean, that might be something that might happen. But I would put the sort of events at the moment where there might be a fire and things, certainly within the purview of the emergency planning process in a way that it should be considered whether we're at risk. And I guess that does happen from time to time. Whether it would feature in the full risk register will depend. So, I mean, you know, we can ask council staff to take that on board and consider it, because if it was something like this going to become a regular event where we're heating up, and in our climate emergency that's been declared in Reading, it may be something that we should consider. Is it an ongoing risk now that should feature and be properly assessed under the risk management? But there are two different things that probably operate with that at the moment. So, I mean, I welcome it. I'm happy to hear, I mean, as the lead member around this now, I kind of feel like I get my briefings and things. I'm happy to hear colleagues' contributions that could improve any of the process and reporting. But I think that it probably is sufficient that it comes when it comes, really, rather than we have it personally every meeting. That would be my view, but that's my view.
Councillor Williams, can I make three thinking or learning points?
I'm sorry, no, there's no facility, unfortunately, to come in from the public. But again,
your discretion.
I'm always happy to receive in writing, though. I'm sure Councillor Terry is as well. I'd like to make a couple of points, because I think Councillor Terry is right. If we ask for things to come to every meeting, then we're going to start to generate work for officers, which is just not valid, and they're going to start to just do lots of busy work for the sake of bringing us reports. However, what I'd like to see with things like risk management is the journey those risks go on. So if they start the year either highly red or highly green, how are they moving throughout the year? And that's something as a committee, if we're seeing all of those improve, we're very happy. If we're seeing them flatline, we may want to start asking questions. My worry is if you only see it in the middle of the year and at the end of the year, or whenever this falls, twice a year, we're maybe not seeing that journey, and so we can't ask those questions. I think it's probably a fine line between generating work for people and us seeing that. So as we go forward, I guess as we see them come every 6 months, we can bear it in mind that we may wish to increase that frequency as things go forward. But Mr. Harrington, a few points have been raised. Is there anything you'd like to say in response?
Yes, just that the risk reporting is part of good governance, and risk management is done on 3 different levels. So it's the strategic, which is the corporate strategic risks, which is the risk register, which will come to this committee. You then have tactical risks, which are managed at a directorate level, and then operational risks, which are managed at a service level and a project level. So just to answer Councillor Gitting's question, is in the strategic risk register, I would expect to see a strategic risk around climate change. That will be there, and yes, it's all very, very real at the moment, given the temperatures we're experiencing, but that will be on the risk register. But this is a very, very high level risk register, so there will be bullet points in terms of the mitigating actions that are in our control, in the authority's control, but there will be detailed work going on in the background. And the actual risk register, when you see it, you will be able to see how the risk has progressed from one quarter to the next quarter to the next quarter. So, but it's now being looked after by Mr. Pringle, and hopefully he'll be presenting it to come next September. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is everyone happy that we send this on to Policy Committee with our endorsement? Thumbs up and agreed. Thank you very much, everyone. Number 7, as I move around on my iPad, is the Finance Improvement Programme. I don't know who the introduction is coming from. Right, online. Do we have, yes. Hello, would you like to introduce this item?
Good evening. Yeah, I can't get my camera on for some reason. Oh, there we are. Good evening, everybody. My name's Chris Tidswell. I'm the lead for the Finance Improvement Programme, for those of you that haven't met me before. This is the regular update to the committee on progress of the Finance Improvement Programme. And as some background, sections 1 to 3 cover the purpose of the programme. So the improvement programme has 2 elements, 2 phases. The first phase has been about getting the basics right, and through that we had developed 6 work streams: accounts payable, accounts receivable, chart of accounts, reconciliations, final accounts, and a new finance system. As an update, you'll see in the report at section 4 that for the majority of the work streams, they've now moved into a monitoring and evaluation process. So this means now that the Transformation Board, which is the overarching governance arrangement for the programme, receives regular reports to make sure that the changes that have been put in place, whether that's through KPIs or through reports, remain in place. So it's part of the compliance regime. And it's been good to hear from Paul Harrington's reports, the changes that have occurred through accounts payable and accounts receivable, which have been an element of that change and transformation programme. The final accounts and reconciliations work streams continue and will be subject of a paper that Darren Carter will present later on. The final element of the programme that refers to on section 4.1 on page 78 is around the new finance system. This has now moved into the build stage. It has a go live planned date of October this year, and that paragraph there provides an update of where that implementation programme is at the moment. The project is chaired by Darren Carter as Director of Finance. The second phase of the transformation programme is around developing the corporate financial management arrangements, financial management and financial governance. This has always been planned to follow phase one and will run in alignment with the implementation of the new finance system. It was important to get the basics right, and there are still elements within those basics that we need to get right and will be addressed as part of the process development for the finance system. Phase two has three key elements. There's engaging with the finance team. So that's concentrating on the developing the skills, capability required by individuals and the teams, and the teams understanding the role and clarity around the role and function of finance and its contribution towards overarching financial management and governance. The second phase is engaging with budget holders across the council. So the key outcome from these is making sure that there's an environment and a culture where there's ownership, there's accountability for financial management, and it's with budget holders. So this is in line with the SIP for Financial Management Code and good financial management practice. And it's the way that finance works with services and services work with finance to deliver that. The third element under the phase two programme is developing those skills and delivering the tools necessary to use the new finance system. The new finance system is pivotal to changes in the way that the organisation works and manages its finance. And it's key then that those users, whether the budget holders or finance individuals, have the right training. And all of that will progress towards the go live in October and then the subsequent training as we move into the new year and further models are introduced. Section 5 on page 79 goes into a bit more detail around where each of the work streams are. One thing that we do as part of the transformation programme is identify and recognise those audit recommendations that we've been talking about earlier that have come from internal audit. So those audit recommendations that appear in that tracker that relate directly to the improvement programme are monitored and progressed through that board. So there's a secondary governance arrangements to make sure that those audit trackers recommendations are delivered. You will see under each of those workstream areas where there are audit recommendations, whether they're green, amber or red, and where there are amber or red, there's a commentary on where there is progress or where there is activity at the moment to respond to those. I would highlight under the accounts receivable that there are audit tracker recommendations that relate to historic debt and the reporting arrangements around that, which have already been reported, and they're a key element of the change programme as well. Chart of accounts is now part of building the new finance system, and then, as I said, you will hear later about reconciliation and final accounts. The last section on section 5 is an update on the new finance system, and if there are any detailed questions around that as part of this report, then I'm quite happy to take those. I think what I would mention is that in terms of the audit tracker and looking at those, it's positive to see progress around those and the delivery of those. And what is evident from the tracker that you'll see later in the papers is that rather than some of the recommendations lingering around for a long time, a number of years, you'll see progress is updated on a regular basis and action is being taken much more quickly. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Members are asked to note the progress detailed in the report. Do we have any comments or questions? Looking down the line, no, everyone seems happy with that. No, everyone seems happy. I don't have any particular comments either. I do think, though, that this programme is one of the most important to Reading Council sort of future financial health. I think it's vital and is moving well. I'm sure we all thank officers for their hard work. Can we note the report?
Noted.
Noted. Thank you very much for dialing in this evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Item 8. Oh yes, one I potentially misunderstood when I read it. Information Governance Quarterly Update. So this comes with an introduction from Mike Graham.
Thank you, Chair. This is a quarterly report in relation to audit and governance matters. There are a couple of areas that I would like to address and bring members' attention to from the report. First of all, in relation to data transparency. As the question for tonight's committee highlights, there's been some slippage in the outcomes which we set up for this process. Some of the data fell out of currency and it was not updated as it should have been. In the last 2 weeks, officers have reviewed the data transparency pages with colleagues and identified where more up-to-date information needs to be provided, and those areas which had slipped are being brought into order. There are only 1 or 2 areas now which we're focusing on. There is only one outstanding area where we've got a more significant issue, which was identified in the answer to tonight's question, which relies on us bringing some data together from disparate systems and also creating data where it does not presently exist. And so this is something of a more complex process which we're looking into. As a result of this, we are revising the policy and the process to tighten things up, and we will take this through the Information Governance Board and report back to your committee in September with progress on that front. Audit colleagues have also reviewed the policy and process, which you might have noted from item 5 on the audit report, and there'll be a further report, follow-up report published on that, and details of that will also be known in time for your September committee. And in the meantime, we'll also be instituting new monitoring processes to ensure that if any data is not being uploaded in the future, we will get a much earlier warning of that and will take remedial action. Secondly, in relation to freedom of information, members will note that the figures contained in the report, that compliance with expected standards remains disappointingly and stubbornly low. We've set ourselves a target to answer 90% of requests within 20 days. That's the minimum standard expected by the Information Commissioner's Office, as you note from the report. And we also elevated those KPIs into the corporate plan because we thought they were that important. We've seen pockets of improvement which have been reported to past committees, which members might recall, with some services answering requests at 80 to 90% of target. So that was giving us a good signal that something was working. However, we've not been able to shift the overall response rate to be consistent with those higher numbers, and overall a response rate which is hanging around 60 to 70% over the past few years is just not acceptable. Despite the number of measures which we've taken over the last year, all of which have been implemented successfully in themselves, they've not collectively made the impact that we were hoping for or that we need, and so we need to take a completely fresh approach to make sure this issue is addressed. Officers have undertaken the Information Commissioner's detailed self-evaluation review for that function, and that covers response rates, handling requirements, training and awareness, compliance and assurance, and governance structures. And the results of this will be presented to CMT as soon as possible so that we can collectively up the ante. We're looking again at all aspects of the process with an action plan which we hope to complete within 3 months, presented to CMT as soon as possible, and we'll give further details and update for your September committee. In addition to that, just to mention as well, you'll have seen on the item 5, audit colleagues have reviewed the process and their draft report will be published soon as well, so you'll have that commentary and assurance as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. I'm not fully sure I understood this when I read it, and it's very possibly the heat, which I shall blame for that. Is there any comment? I do have some questions and comments, but I might save my, there are no stupid questions, apart from my own. I might save those for the end. Does anyone? Yes, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Point of information, Mike. What sanctions does the ICO have over us if we don't improve our percentage rate, or is it simply that it's a requirement that we have a degree of flexibility to observe as quickly as we can?
Please.
No, there's no financial penalty. It's not like data protection issues. It's reputational. Obviously, the council's reputation has taken a knock with this because we are publicising it, but also, we have received complaints about the fact that people aren't getting information in a timely way. Again, which takes up a lot of management time and effort to look into. The other more serious sanction which could be placed on is if we effectively get placed on the Information Commissioner's watch list, so that they don't just rely on the fact that you've done a self-assessment, that they come in and do their own assessment of what's going wrong, and then make further directions about how you should get your house in order.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Yes,
Mr. Graham is right in that it is a cost on the authority.
Unfortunately, we don't have the facility for the public to chip in, but Councillor Gittings is going to speak now.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the response rate, I mean, in the report, when you say we've got a 60% response rate, is that within a certain time frame we're setting there, or we just haven't responded because it's totally unclear, or we just haven't responded at all to 40% of them when we should do 90?
Well, we do respond. We're looking at the things which are dragging over the 20-day limit. Okay. So the figures are in the report, and they're presented quarterly, and again, they come to CMT quarterly, so we keep an eye on them there. We also get weekly updates of things which are going over, but of course at that point we've lost the ability to take action to get them in time. So one of the things that we're looking at is, well, how can we get information to the right people early enough so that they can, sorry, I'm being attacked by someone, so that they can actually take action to keep us within the 20 days.
I mean, 20 days is quite a challenging target, I would have said, depending on the inquiry. And what's the percentage of inquiries, say, from the media and as against the public? Because I remember when this came before the committee there was when this legislation was passed, and I think it's good that it's passed because you need transparency. But a lot of the queries were coming from media, and they're broad, sweeping type questions about all sorts of things that require quite a lot of detailed work.
Yeah, we don't track that, where they come from, or we're advised under the code of practice not to make inquiries as to why people are asking the question. We're sort of requester blind in that regard, to make sure that when we're answering the question, it's an answer which could be given to the world at large as well. So the identity and the rationale only comes into the requester if it's really a vexatious request, or it's being used, or FOI is being used in some way as an abusive process. So, for instance, we have got one person at the moment who's trying to circumvent the fact that they're on the single point of contact procedure by making repeated FOI requests. So that's something we would then say, well, we know why you're doing this, and we're not taking those questions. But otherwise, if anybody asks a question, then we would answer them.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Emerson.
Thank you, Chair. I know we've spoken before about the website, and it's kind of been improved in terms of those repeat FOIs that we get. And I note that the report refers to the golf club, and I appreciate they're probably separate questions being asked rather than continuous repeat, but they weren't on the website, for example, when I looked earlier. So it'd just be helpful and reassuring to understand the process of reviewing that website, because the list does get bigger every time I look at it, because I sometimes do when we have audit and governance, because I have nothing else to do. And there's a big list that has kept growing, but how do we keep track of stuff like the golf club or big issues where we know for a period we're going to continuously be bombarded?
Well, one of the things that we want to sort of promote, we have promoted it in the past, and I don't think we've pushed enough or got enough results out of it, is about the updating the publication scheme. The best way for officers to avoid having to answer a question is if they make the information available to us to fit in with that regular pattern of the transparency pages, which we can add to in the publication scheme. There are data sets we know that people do rely on, and we want to get those pushed through automatically. The module that we've got is very good at then helping people get an answer which has already been given, but unfortunately the supplier can't give us the stats about how many times that's used to divert a question away from the full process, and we have pushed the supplier to make some adjustments because that's the information which we want to get out of the system to understand how successful it is. We are, as part of the action plan, one of the things we have discussed is looked at how we can change the procedure, so where we've got something which is triaged out of the system by providing an early answer, we get that information coming back in so that we have got the data about how effective those pre-published sources of information are being. So that will be one of the things which we'll be taking forward to get better data for that ourselves.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on sifting the FOI requests as they come in. Maybe would it be something like AI? Would that be useful? You think, or even because I know that other organisations use AI for sort of not like front end triaging, as you would say, and then push it on to the right person, or you know, saying, well, we already have answered a similar FOI and flag that to the operator, something like that.
I must admit, we haven't thought about that, but it's certainly something which we could raise with the supplier about the technology to see if that's something that they're developing along those lines.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, I think, as no one else is indicating. First of all, why is the Brighter Futures data in there? Is that in the report so that we're simply aware of it, or is a RBC resource working on the Brighter Futures FOIs? Is that why the data's in there?
It's a bit of both.
It's a bit of both.
Yes, we do provide the service to help Brighter Futures compile their data, but also we want to know, because they're responsible for children's services functions, that they're answering questions appropriately.
Okay, I'll have to have a pause for thought about that one. And my second question is, whilst we are trying to get up to that 90%, which does sound like a challenge, but one we should be meeting, do we know how we match up to our sort of statistical neighbours? Do we know how other local authorities are performing in this area? Is it common that this is an issue, or is it uncommon?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, what I'd rather do is get our own house in order first, and really not, if other people are struggling, I think I'd say, well, that's their problem as well. We know what the minimum standard is. So if we met the minimum standard and then we're trying to get to 100, it might be worth knowing what other people are doing. But it looks like we've got some basics to get right even before we start talking to our neighbours. I mean, I would be happy to talk to the neighbours, see if they've got any better ideas about it, because if they've got something which works, they've got something which works. But then I know that, for instance, when we had our IG review last year, the council that did the review for us doesn't use a case management system that we use. It works on a much simpler kind of manual process, but obviously their process is embedded and they've got a culture right to make sure that it works for them. That's obviously, they've obviously taken time to get to that stage, and we're now trying to get to the stage that they use. So is it technology? Is it people? Is it the way that we've got things set up and structured? Is it the culture? It's a combination of all of these things, and that's why we've had to sort of ask ourselves some searching questions about everything from leadership all the way down to the shop floor. What's happening that we could act on to make sure that these things happen as we want to. So we will be going out to every team in the autumn and doing face-to-faces with them all to explain the impact and the seriousness, and then asking them for sort of feedback about where they think the problems are, and make it a dialogue as well as explaining how important it is.
Thank you very much. So my understanding is that we will receive at the next Audit and Governance both, we're likely to receive reports from internal audit on both the freedom of information and on the transparency areas, and update reports from your own team on both of those areas as well. So September the something or other, whenever that meeting falls, we will be very well informed in this area, I think. So we were asked to note the progress to date, and the actions outlined in the report. We were also asked to identify matters of interest for future reports, if anyone has any. I think for the time being, these are our areas of interest, and we're going to get those reports. So I think we're happy. Everyone's nodding. Okay, are we all agreed to note the reports? Yep. Thank you very much. Okay, we've briefly lost Councillor Gettings. Okay, agenda item 9 is the Audit Recommendations Tracker, with an introduction from Jackie Yates.
Thank you, Chair. This report, members who've been party to the committee previously will be familiar with. Effectively, it tracks all of the internal audit recommendations that are made throughout the year, and tracks progress with implementation in the appendix. So you can see at paragraph 4.3, there are currently 96 recommendations on the Audit Tracker attached at Appendix 1. 18 of those are being reported as completed since the last meeting and will be removed before the September meeting. There have been 17 additional recommendations added as part of the work Paul and his team have been doing. You can see in the table at 4.4 the age of the recommendations, and certainly for 2021, those older recommendations, you can see that they have been reducing down. So we've only got 20 recommendations still outstanding from 2021, and we are putting effort into reducing that further. And you can see the additional 17 for the current financial year having been added on the third line there. The table at 411 effectively shows you the movement of the recommendations. I have to confess, it takes a couple of times to get your head around how this works, but what it shows at 411 are the 101 recommendations that were outstanding in April, and then it plots of those 101 recommendations where we are with them now. So you can see 22 have been removed, some are now reporting as complete, some are still green, some that were red are now reporting as amber, etc. You can also see the June 22 new recommendations being added and how they fall, whether they're already complete, and then you have the total in the final column, the 96. So the detail of progress with implementation is, as I say, in Appendix 1. I am happy to take any questions, Chair.
Perfect, thank you very much. Yep, 17 new recommendations added, although those don't map to the 16 new recommendations that we talked about earlier on item 5, because this doesn't map priority 3 recommendations, which are not tracked, and some have been added since the last report but relate to earlier audits. I've got a technical question on just how those items are RAG rated, but I think that's slightly boring, so we'll come back to that at the end. Do members have any comments or thoughts? We can see individual recommendations moving through the system. We can see the direction of travel. No, everyone's just nodding. Oh, it is just my really boring question. Sorry about this. Okay, so section 4.5 tells us how these are RAG rated. And that includes any that are less than 50% but are past due date being red. There are 11 items marked as amber, but they're less than 50% and past their due date. So they're not following that strict sort of RAG definition in 4.5. So I guess my question is that strict definition actually open to officers putting their own level of information and knowledge into it and therefore marking them as amber, because they kind of really are? Or should we really be following that strict definition? Should those 11 actually be red?
So I think there may have been some confusion, Chair. So if I may, the appendix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 7th column in is headed up original audit completion date. It isn't the date that the recommendation was due to be implemented.
Okay.
That was the date that the audit was completed.
Okay.
What I have done for those that are still reporting as less than 50% complete, where the audit date was older, I have asked colleagues to double check that they are appropriately RAG rated, and I have had confirmation that they are. For transparency purposes, what I think we need to do probably for next time is add an additional column that gives you the actual date that it was the recommendation was agreed to be implemented by. Yeah.
That answers it perfectly. Thank you very much. Well, if we add it in, that's great. So no one's indicating at this point, but we do have the power as a committee to call in an officer if we wish to get some more detailed questions and answers on any area that gives us concern that we might identify through this tracker. So I want to raise that. Do we want to exercise that power? I'm not suggesting myself that we bring anyone in personally, but does any member think that we have an area of concern that we'd like an update on? Not today. Good news for officers wishing to avoid coming into an extra meeting. So are we all happy? Oh, Councillor Emerson.
It's not in relation to that.
No.
It just occurred to me when Jackie mentioned putting in the additional column. We often have spoken about how hard this is to read, and those of us that are electronic find it fine, but if you add another column, it's going to become even more difficult. I don't know a solution, but I'm just throwing it out there because I know colleagues will raise that at the next meeting. Perhaps shortening the column length as they are now might work, making them shorter, but I'm just raising it because I know it will come up.
Thank you. Do you think it'll be possible to fit that in without making it a complete eyesore?
If I can be, of course we can add it in, of course we can amend the columns. I would encourage members to use their electronic devices because we will be killing more trees if we reduce columns, I'm afraid.
I would endorse that that view, but I'm sure we all would. Not everyone is comfortable using a screen, but that is the easiest way to look through these, I think. Are members happy that this report is giving us the information we need? Yeah, everyone's happy. Yep. Just no comments this time. Excellent. Are you all happy with the recommended actions? Yes, some nods and some agreeds. Thank you very much indeed. And we move on to agenda item 10. If I again click around on my electronic device, we have the annual Treasury Management Review with an introduction from, I'm not quite sure, is it Darren Carter?
It is.
Good evening. Please go ahead.
Hello there. First off, thank you for all those members of Audit Committee who attended the recent Treasury Management training. I think it went really well, and we were very happy with the level of engagement that we got from members of the committee. So this is the annual report into the performance of Treasury Management for the year ended 31st of March 2022. The Council did not experience any significant cash flow difficulties during the year. None of our PIs were breached. No new borrowing was taken out during the year. Our gross borrowing excluding PFI stood at £387 million against a CFR of £593 million, meaning that we were under borrowed by £206 million as at 31st of March, saving the council a potential interest costs in the region of £7 million per annum. General fund external interest costs for the year were £7.4 million. £357 million of our borrowing is with the Public Works Loans Board, and the other 30 million is market loans. The PWLB loans have an average remaining life of 30 years and an average interest rate of 3.27%, all at fixed costs. We no longer have any variable rate loans. We ended the year with investments of 116 million, including Treasury investments of 80 million, 65 million of which is managed in-house, with 15 million managed externally through a property fund. The remaining £35.7 million is invested in our subsidiary companies. Now, please accept my apologies, but rereading the report again earlier, I realised that there's a typo in Table 8, where the total non-Treasury investments are incorrectly quoted as £36.321 million. This is an error. The figure should have been 35.721 as per the detail in the table. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. We are asked to note the report, and I'd like to thank Darren again for the training session that some of us were able to attend. Members, do you have any questions or comments on this one? Looking down the line, no one's in a rush. Oh, Councillor Terry?
Well, it is a really positive report. Yeah. I mean, no net borrowing. We've got rid of all our variables, so we've got fixed rates in the current climate. That is, very good management. So there's no doubt that, that earlier on we heard about getting the good internal audit report. And I think we should just acknowledge that there's some excellent work being done here in managing the Treasury management function of the council, and that it really supports our budget and the provision of our services to the people of Reading. It's not always easy to follow it. It's not always, and someone who was once a councillor who lives at home with me used to go on about how, the trouble is that when you start talking about millions of pounds, for ordinary people, because we never see that sort of money ourselves, it starts to get a bit wobbly. It starts to get a bit, what does this mean? And it's all quite scary, or it's just over your head. So Treasury management is one of those things that often is a bit sort of, a previous council officer used to bring us in lots of charts, which we used to measure whether the success was based on his ties as well. I mean it very kindly, but they look like, Dad's tie that you used to have on your presentations and things. And we would go, I don't understand. But actually, it's important to get some understanding of it, and in the current financial climate, to recognise just how well this is going. It's and I really just want to say that. I think it can be easy to brush over a report like this and think, I don't get the numbers, they're too big. But it is incredibly important, and thank you to everyone who's been working hard on getting that right, and not reducing our borrowing. We're doing the things we need to do, but making sure that we're using everything else before we go out to the market again.
Thank you very much, Councillor Terry. A lot of these reports come to us. We don't have a massive amount to comment on them, but they represent a huge amount of work that officers have done in the background. So you're quite right to raise that. I'm going to raise something else, unless there's any more indications on this one. No, I'm going to say something. So my only comment here is that I would note with some pride, actually, that we have an ethical investment policy. You can see that in the report at 10.1. It says the council will not knowingly invest directly in businesses whose activities and practices pose a risk of serious harm to individuals or groups, that is, including institutions with material links to human rights abuses and others. So I think it's worth us questioning whether this is working exactly as designed when we're at the same time investing millions of pounds in the nation of Qatar. So £15 million was invested in the Qatar National Bank, to be exact. So Qatar has a lamentable human rights record. It has a legal system that discriminates against women. LGBT people face discrimination and even jail. So it's troubling that we might send a message to the people of Reading that the council is happy to invest millions of pounds in a country that would imprison homosexual men. But I'd like to be really clear, this is not a slight on what officers have done, because as Councillor Terry said, they're using every means at their disposal to find financial solutions that will save us or even make us money. And Qatar is on the list of approved countries to invest in. And this is not really a slight on the Qatar National Bank. I don't know what kind of organisation they are. What it is a question of whether the ethical investment policy is working, as I think we all want it to work, when a nation like Qatar is available to us to put £15 million of Reading's money. The fly is now attacking me. It disagrees. So I think maybe these are some questions about what we're seeing in this report that perhaps might be taken up at other meetings. I don't think that Audit and Governance is the place to discuss this from a political point of view. But I think when we see these things coming in reports to Audit and Governance, I think we should raise them, and we'll see what other committees might make of that. So unless anyone else has a comment on that, or you wish to say anything else, we'll move to note the report. No other indications? Are you all happy to note? Thank you. Item 10 is complete. Item 11 is the Q4 performance report. This was received already by Policy Committee just earlier this month. It didn't generate any particular discussion and was unanimously agreed by all members on policy. So I think we could probably move through it fairly quickly. But we should have a brief introduction. Is that Mr. Carter again?
It's me again. And I will keep it brief because, as you said, it's already been through Policy Committee. So this is the year-end financial report for the year ended 31st of March 2022 for Reading Borough Council. In my opinion, it's a good news report. When we set the budget for 21-22, we were clearly in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the budget that was set made a planned use of £2.7 million of earmarked reserves in order to deliver a balanced budget position. That £2.7 million call on reserves hasn't been necessary during the course of the year. A balanced budget was delivered without it. And due to the outturned overspend on services being less than projected, we've actually ended up with £3.1 million of corporate contingencies that weren't necessary to be used during 21-22. So the report to Policy Committee recommended the use of that £3.1 million, largely to support the delivery of the Council's capital programme and to avoid having to undertake unnecessary borrowing, linking back to the previous report. So I think it was a good news report, and I'm happy to take any other questions that the Audit and Governance Committee might have.
Thank you very much. I don't think there was any at policy, but are there any from Audit and Governance? No, we're just happy to receive good news, I think. So thank you very much. No comments, so we are asked to note the report. Are all agreed? Yep. Thank you very much. We move on to item 12, which is the accounts update, with an introduction again from Mr. Carter, I think.
Well, this time I'm going to hand over to my colleague Mark Sanders, the Chief Accountant, to present this report.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. My name is Mark Sanders. I'm Chief Accountant at Reading Borough Council. I've been here 4 months. Members of committee will have seen me at last committee meeting in April on the accounts. I hope to meet you all in person looking forward. So the report tonight is an update on the closing financial accounts for 2019-20. The report has 2 recommendations. The first one is for committee to note the progress on the accounts and any comments you have on that tonight. And the second recommendation is a delegation to the Director of Finance in consultation with the Chair of the Audit and Governance Committee to sign off the accounts at the conclusion of the audit of which we are close. If you're minded to agree those recommendations at the end, please. So committee will be aware that the 1920 external audit process is underway. We published our 1920 accounts on 10th November 2021, and since that the external audit fieldwork has been underway. In April, I reported to committee that we were almost through the process, and we were hoping to conclude the audit by July. We're not quite able to do that today, and that is despite an increase in focus by council staff, but also an increase in resources from EY to support the process. We have found that there have been a few new areas that have taken longer to resolve over the last couple of months, but I'm happy to conclude that we are very close to the process now. We're anticipating a conclusion sometime over the next month. The work in the interim has been around our estimates for bad debt provisions and our income reconciliation work. There were two areas of work that was in the draft report in front of you, which was the written report was as at 8th of July. I can bring an update on that today, which is some 11 days forward on that. The two areas that we were working on were around cash income suspense and confirmation of intercompany transactions. For both these areas, we have just about concluded our work. The cash income suspense is been verbally briefed to our external auditors earlier this afternoon. There's a small reconciliation and explanation to be drafted over the next day. We have a meeting on Thursday afternoon to conclude the intercompany transactions, and these are matters of timing on debtors and creditor balances between Reading Borough Council and Brighter Futures, and these are mainly matters of timing. There are some adjustments that we feel that we will make as a result of those that relate to timing, and we'll talk those through and agree those with the auditors on Thursday later this week. The accounts themselves have had a few technical and presentational adjustments over the last 3 to 6 months, and wherever any adjustments have been highlighted to us, we have made them in our accounts. One other matter that has arisen over this time is a national position regarding the accounting for infrastructure assets. Reading has some £130 million worth of infrastructure assets on our balance sheet. Following a query raised from a external audit firm around the accuracy of valuation data in local authority accounts and the rules from which SIPF set to account for such assets, SIPF have issued a consultation on revising the appropriate disclosure requirements around infrastructure assets. The consultation period is closed, but we haven't had any further information about how to make such changes in our accounts yet. That's due around, I think, around August, and as soon as SIPF have reported and updated its code of practice, and then both us and our external auditor will be able to review that and make changes to our accounts. Outside of that, virtually all of the audit field work has been completed, and you'll hear after my item, Adrian from our external auditors will give an update for our process. The national position on external audit field work, it's worth considering that in context. There's a number of challenges faced across the external audit sector currently, and the last collation of this data was at 31st of May 22, when there were around 51 local authorities that hadn't signed off their 1920 accounts. That's 51, and we're one of them. There were a further 19 authorities that hadn't signed off from earlier years. And as we look at 2021 year, there were some 201 local authorities that hadn't had their audits signed off at that time. So nationally, the position on resources around our external audit field work is extremely challenging. So whilst we're in a position of catching up in Reading, and I'm fully convinced that we can do that, it's in the background of difficulties across the national sector in all across England. We look forward to the 2021 and 21-22 accounts. This is where I hope I will be bringing updates to committee over the next year. Every time you see me at committee, I'm hopefully going to be bringing you positive moves and improvements as we go forward to catching up through our accounts. So we're hoping, as I say, to get our 1920 accounts signed off sometime over the next month, subject to SIP for issuing new presentation arrangements around infrastructure assets. When we look to 2021 accounts, I'm expecting to prepare draft accounts for August this year, August 22. The deadline for draft accounts was July 2021. I'm expecting, we're planning for sign off through the audit process around November this year. External Audit have confirmed that they can issue and begin their audit process on the 1st of August, so that's in less than 2 weeks time. So that's great news that our 2021 audit process will begin. Causes me some complications as I'm finalising 1920 and preparing 2021, but we've got an approach to working through that with our external auditors, and I'm convinced we'll be able to do that. I'm looking at concluding the 2021 draft accounts, looking to prepare draft accounts around next January 23, and we're looking to have sign off for the 2021 accounts around April, subject to external audit resources. And by around this time next year, so around May, June, July next year, I'm looking to have prepared the draft 22-23 accounts at that point, and the deadlines for sign off for the 22-23 accounts will be September 23. That's the clear goal of my team working through that. If we achieve that in a year's time, we will be completely up to date and on time with our audit process and our deadlines. So considering that the accounts that we're currently working on for 1920 are approaching 2 years behind schedule, the resources that have been put in place just prior to my arrival and our processes since I've been in, we carry that forward for the next year, and we're aiming to bring back up to speed in that year's time. I'll pause at that point and take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. To go from 2 years behind and with the history of the accounts which have been worked through to potentially being on time in the next 12 months must be a heroic effort from the finance team. So let's start with some thank yous. We are asked to note the report and worryingly to give the Director of Finance in consultation with the Chair of Audit and Governance to sign off the statement of accounts. So that's me. But I don't think I'll play an enormous role in that. Now, does anyone have any questions or any comments or thoughts? Yes, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Sanders, and to Mr. Carter for everything you've been doing on this, as the committee notes. Clearly, to date, though, the Council has incurred substantial external audit fees to get to this stage, and clearly those will be continuing, if at a decelerated rate, as the work progresses. I appreciate the report says in 9.1 that the fees for 1920 will be reported in due course, but can you give us any idea of the scale of the running audit fees, if you like, as we're currently liable for?
Yes, can I pass that to Mr. Carter?
Yes, so at the moment, unfortunately, no, I can't give you an indication of the 1920 fees. Once the audit is concluded, EY will prepare their proposed fees. They will send a note to me, and they will also send a note to PSAA, the national body that oversees the audit arrangements. And at that point, the PSAA will make contact with me to discuss whether I think the fees proposed by EY are reasonable. So we're probably still a few months away from me receiving that contact from the PSAA and being able to confirm the fees for that year. But as soon as they are available, I'll report them through the committee.
Thank you very much. Are you happy with that answer?
Obviously, we'd like more information as soon as is available. And Darren was kind enough to brief us before the last budget that they were slowing down as the work improves. But clearly, it is a running issue for the council that we want to get resolved as well. So I'll be grateful for that update when we can have it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Is there any other comments? Yes.
This is probably something that's come up at previous committees, but since I'm new, I don't know. Is the finance department, I mean, obviously you said this is going to be heroic effort. I mean, is their staffing good? Because I'm obviously looking at the reports and generally there's recruitment problems. I don't mean, in all professional areas generally. I mean, are you staffed up, I suppose is the question, to cope, say, if there's an illness or something like that?
Yes, I think that's a good question, because we have the question of permanent and temporary roles within all the teams as well, and within finance. So it would be great to have a comment from Darren Carter.
Yeah, so as Paul referred to earlier, the 5 most senior posts in the core finance team are now filled by permanent staff. So that's myself, Stuart Donnelly, my deputy, Mark as the chief accountant, and Steve McDonald and Claire Gavigan as the strategic business partners. It's been a huge effort to get to that point of having a permanent senior team. The 2 crucial posts that report to Mark in terms of the technical accountants who do the bulk of the work on these statements of accounts, we haven't been able to recruit to those posts permanently at the moment. So we have a number of interim staff in supporting us. Those interim staff are extremely good, extremely capable. But over the course of the next couple of months, we need to start another round of permanent recruitment to attempt to make permanent appointments into those posts, because eventually we'll need to move on from having the interim support and having a full permanent team in place. I'm confident that the proposals that Mark and myself are working on at the moment will mean that we can be successful next time we go out to recruit to those posts. But at the moment, I don't want to disrupt the work of the team by losing the really excellent interims that we've got in place at the moment, who are doing an outstanding job on making progress on these audits. So there is a bit of a balancing act there to do.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your question? Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Are there any more indications on the accounts? No, I think we all offer our thanks then to the permanent and to the interim members of the team that are moving this forward. Fingers crossed that that timeline will play out as we hope it will. We are obviously reliant on external audit resource to some degree, and we'll have a report on that next. But for the time being, we are asked to note the report and authorise the sign-off of the 1920 accounts when they are ready. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you to the finance team for that presentation. I'm not sure who we have. It was Adrian was mentioned from the external audit team.
Yeah, good evening, Chair.
Good evening. Are you indicating? Oh, okay. Yes, I'll come to Jackie Yates shortly, but if we could go to Adrian now. Thank you very much. Do you have a brief update for us?
Yeah, it's just a very brief verbal update. So just for the benefit of the committee, for those people that don't know me, I'm a senior manager with EY, been on the audit for the last 5 or 6 years. Sort of worked through from the 16-17 accounts all the way through to where we currently are. So just kind of have got good experience in terms of working through some of those substantive issues that we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years, and also happy to kind of give some reassurance to the committee in terms of the progress that we're seeing through 1920. So as both Mark and Darren have said, we're reaching a conclusion of the 1920 audit. We present our audit plan back to the January 22 committee, and we also reported our draft audit results report back to the April committee as well. Both of those detailed the significant risks we'd identified for this year's audit, also the audit strategy, and also kind of where we currently were, and also some of the key findings we'd identified. For the benefit of the committee, for the last few years, we've qualified the value for money conclusion. That's been reported back to committee on a regular basis, and the result of that's the result of the Ofsted inspection into the children's company and the creation of the Brighter Futures. All of our considerations and documentation was reported back to the April committee on that. It's important for the committee to understand that conclusion on value for money is very specific to that particular year. So although we can see progress beyond 1920, we have to kind of give our commentary and an opinion on the value for money at the period as of the 31st of March 2020. In terms of the accounts progress, we've had really good engagement from senior officers through the last 7-8 months. So we meet twice weekly, and that's at very senior level to make sure that issues are escalated as they need to be. We're reaching the conclusion of the audit fieldwork. We're pulling together our conclusions, and we'll be reporting those back to senior officers within the next few weeks in terms of where we think we are in terms of what that means for our audit opinion. For the benefit of the committee, the last couple of years we've had a qualified audit opinion in a number of areas. We're happy to report that actually the number of qualifications over the last number of years has gone down each year. So we're hopeful that we'll see some more progress in this area again this year. We'll report back to the September committee in terms of our assessment of the final judgments and conclusions in respect of the errors for 1920 and what that means for our audit opinion. And obviously, Mark and Darren have both referred to the national infrastructure asset issue, which is emerging and also is trying to be concluded. As soon as we have a resolution on that, the audit partner will then be able to progress and sign off the opinion with the delegated authority that's been approved through committee. And then at the September committee, we'll then bring our final audit results report, where you'll be able to see our conclusions and assessments against some of those significant risks, and also importantly, the errors we identified during the audit and what that meant for our final audit opinion. We'll then be able to give you an indication in September and what that means for us moving into 2021. As both Mark and Darren have said, we have resources booked from the beginning of August to start the 2021 audit, and that's committed all the way through to November and December. Given the tightness of resources across the audit market, we've prioritised Reading as a resource that we want and an audit that we want to try and get back on track. So that's a commitment we've made, and we've kind of working with officers and meet with them regularly to discuss how we're going to do that. So really, it was just to kind of give the committee the assurance to kind of where we are from an external audit point of view, and the kind of extensive progress that's been made from when we report our audit plan in January and also our audit results report in April. Happy to take any questions anyone has about this audit specifically, or kind of the wider audit market, or indeed any of the plans for both 2021 and also 21-22.
Thank you very much. Thank you for dialing in this evening. Members, do we have any questions or comments? No, we've got shaking heads here. I think everyone will be very interested in your report that comes to the September committee. I guess my only question is, it seems like both the Reading finance team and yourselves are juggling multiple audits at once. Does that give you a specific challenge that it is difficult to meet, or is that something that's regular for teams like yourself?
It is challenging. So, ideally what we'd want to see from the finance point of view is actually that we disappear for 6 months of the year and actually give them a chance to do everything else they need to do. Because obviously, the audit is very intensive, but also we appreciate that they've also got a day job to do as well. So in an ideal world, we wouldn't be doing multiple audits, but in terms of given the circumstances that we're in, I think it's beneficial while we have the momentum going, and actually the relationship built with some of the key permanent staff, but also some of the key interim staff as well, that we try and keep the momentum and try and push through and actually kind of have that knowledge while it's still there. Because obviously if people do leave, it becomes very difficult to have that organisational knowledge and some of the history of the changes. So yeah, in an ideal world, no, but certainly given where we currently are, it's probably trying to make the best of what we currently have from both parties, and certainly that's the commitment that we're seeing from the Reading team, and also we're given on behalf of EY into that process as well.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we're just all grateful for that update. I don't see any more indications in the room. Excellent. Well, yeah, no, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to your September full report and presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks.
Yes, can I move to Jackie Yates?
Sorry, Chair, I was a little bit late, following on from Darren's talking about staffing. I just wanted to let members know that to kind of help address that longer term issue we've got and have had for some little while in recruiting permanent members to the team, we have for the last 2-3 years now employed a number of apprentice graduates. So they come in, graduates, and then do their sit for training with us. That enables the council to take advantage of the apprenticeship levy, but also for us to train people up and you know, hopefully secure them in roles in the council. And currently there are 4 trainees. One of them is just about to qualify later this year, and we have got sort of 2 tracks running, 2 are at one stage and 2 at another. And just to share a piece of good news, one of those trainees, Fanula McCoy, was given a presentation at the annual SITFA conference last year. She scored top of all of the students in the year in one of her financial accounting exams. So that was a real feather in the cap for her, and, you know, reflected well on the council. And, you know, we will, as part of Darren's restructure, which is something he's also working on, look to be ensuring that we can keep those good trainees in the structure moving forward. So that's another way we're trying to address, as well as bringing in agency staff.
Oh, thank you very much for that update. And do pass the congratulations of Audit and Governance onto that top of the class apprentice. I think that is meeting closed then, members and officers. Thanks very much for everyone who attended online or in person. Next Audit and Governance is the 28th of September. So I'll see you all then. Thank you very much.